what is design thinking? Is there a particular method by which you can take the technology that surrounds us and create a product, something that's useful? Is there a process to innovation that improves lives? Well, the answer is yes. And in this video, I will talk you through the steps of what's known as design thinking, or the design process. It's something that I learned over at the design school while at Stanford, and it inspired me to undertake quite a few different startup ventures. And it's a process that inspires me to date. The process is essentially 9 steps. 1, identify pain points. 2, explore your pain points. 3, brainstorming your solutions. 4, selecting avenues through consensus. 5, quick and dirty prototyping. 6, understanding your beta testers. 7, iterate. 8, understand your market. And finally 9, fundraise. The process is one that when you go through, it should involve a lot of work, but if this is something that speaks to you, it should feel really rewarding. So it'll be very fun to do. It's sort of like playing a sport where there's a lot of activity, it's exhausting, but it's fun. So hopefully ahead of time you can prepare yourself for this, and at the end of going through one design process, you would be able to identify for yourself if you are a product person or not. So first step is pain points, identifying pain points. Now, we all have different pain points in our lives, and you can make them as nebulous or as specific as you want to start off with, and perhaps break them down if it's a little too much to swallow or to chew. So, for example, one pain point could be law and order. Why is it that police do not enact official country laws? Another one could be that there's not enough innovative groups. So how do we create more innovative groups? Perhaps this is a little too far away from home, so something that you could start off with that could directly impact you would be, I have to tie my shoelaces every day. How do I not do that? Or I have to brush my teeth twice a day. Is there any solution to improve the process, make it more enjoyable, or reduce how much time it takes? So that's typically how you identify pain points, is you go through your life and you're just observant. What is it that's not inspiring you? What is it that you would love to be more inspiring in your life? And choose that avenue and go down that. So once you've identified these pain points, hopefully you'll be able to look at other people and identify their pain points, and that's when you become truly a product expert, is when you start to be able to identify pain point in others. The next step then would be step 2, explore your pain points. And the best way to do this would be to collect 4 or 5 individuals who have these pain points and sit down with each of them for 20 to 30 minutes and just ask them to describe what is it about the pain point that's frustrating for them, and just describe what it's like, and be specific to ask what are their top solutions and collect the solutions. And ideally, if you can, try to shadow them for half a day. So and when you shadow them, take a notebook, a small little pocketbook, and just write down any notes, anything that you observe that's out of the blue. If it's ordinary, anything, just make notes. And afterwards, at the prototyping stage, you'll find that going through the notes, you'll be surprised how much you wrote that you didn't remember. And going through all of them, you'll find that there are commonalities between all of the people that you shadowed. So this is sort of the research that you're doing, without which there's not that much hope of coming up with solutions. So the next step would be brainstorming solutions, and ideally this would be 3 to 8 people, and each of these people should have gone and shadowed or interviewed with people who have these problems. Make sure you write down what the solutions are, and make sure that you try the best solution for 24 hours. So for example, for the project that I was doing at the Stanford Design School, I actually had to use a walker for 24 hours, which includes restroom breaks, which includes getting into and out of a car as if I had no use or very little use of my lower body, so I had to support myself with my upper body. So I actually had to use it, and by doing so I really empathized and understood what the problem was and what the pains really were, that the walkers, they weren't very stable, it was easy to slip, and if you're disabled, that's the worst thing that you want, is to be using something that's not very stable, where it's easy to slip and it's hard to get up. So as an example, use it. So the next part would be number 3, brainstorming solutions. For this, you would want your group of 3 to 8 people to brainstorm, and it requires nothing more than post-it notes, a pen, a very large wall, and chocolate or something sweet, whatever is enjoyable to everyone. And chocolate actually is a recommended aid, because the sugar rush actually gets the creative process going. It makes it easier to connect and people to get along with each other. Before you do this, it's important that for every brainstorming session, everyone agrees on one person who is going to lead the brainstorming session, because it's important for you to remain positive. The reason for this is because you need to come up with crazy ideas. There's no such thing as a crazy idea, because when you come up with crazy ideas that are clearly not implementable in your generation or any generation, it's simply demonstrating that your mind is stretching. It's stretching its limits, and the more it stretches, then it can come back to crazy, good ideas, and that's what you're looking for. So think of it that way, that people are just stretching their minds, just like on a sports ground. They're stretching before the actual game. And if there is any negativity inside the group, then that negativity is going to kill the creative thinking process. So if one person is calling out other people that their ideas are not good, or that person needs to leave the room, because that will kill the process immediately. And in order for that to happen, you need to have a leader, and the leader's specific job is to keep the ideas flowing. So in the brainstorming, 3 to 8 people, you do round robin, come up with an idea. It can be inspired by other people, a small shift from another idea or whatever. Write it down, ideally between 2 to 3 words. Define, condense your idea into 2 to 3 words that you remember it, and put it up on the board, and then you keep going. So after doing this a few times, maybe you have 20 to 40 ideas. You'll have a feel of if this is enough or not. Once you've reached that stage, then you can move on to the next step, which is consensus. Now, number 4, consensus. The idea behind design thinking with a number of people is that multiple ordinary brains thinking together and synergizing can come up with much better solutions, much more creative solutions than a single genius all alone in a room. Therefore, consensus is an important part of it. Now, it's important you do not fall in love with your own ideas, and to go with your gut. So once you get to consensus, drop everything, ego, pretend that this is the first time you've seen the board, you don't know where the ideas came from, and then start voting. The easiest way to vote is to take post-it notes, just cut them into thin strips, hand out 3 strips to every person, and they go and vote for their top 3 ideas. Once that's done, you tally it up, and whichever idea had the most votes is your successful first try. Now make sure to write down your top 3 ideas, because all of them are good, and if the first one doesn't work out, you can come back and try the second one, and maybe you come back and it helps you inspire. So the whole, go back to the first one, back and forth. There's a lot of iteration that's involved, so be as creative as possible in the whole process, including the process itself. Now, once you've all agreed that this is the idea that we're going to work on, and perhaps you have a little bit of a discussion if there's a stalemate or a tie, but just remember, keep the process going, find one, pick one, move forward to the next step, iterate. It's important to keep it going. That brings us to step 5, which is prototyping. And prototyping is always quick and dirty. So anything that's cheap, easily available, pens, pencils, plastic tubes, rubber hoses, styrofoam, anything that could help you put together what the form of the idea is that people can play around with, and sort of you get that feedback on how they're responding to it. That's what you're looking for in a prototype. And always remember, prototyping is going back and forth between the prototype and beta testing. So it's a lot of iterations, and that's how you need to work your way around the process. So for example, for prototyping, an example of this would be that another team of ours in the project, their specific project was to make it easier for elderly patients and elderly people in general to use the restroom, because it's very hard, everything hurts, it's very hard to sit down, it's very hard to stand back up. And conventional toilets are ideal places where elderly people fall and break something. So there already are solutions. Top solutions are a handle somewhere near the restroom where they can grab onto, move up and move down. But as you can imagine, as you're older, arm strength is not that, there isn't that much. Secondly, it's on the side. So on the side, they're kind of straining so they can break something else. If they do it multiple times a day, you're putting a lot of stress on your shoulder. So these are sort of things you pick up on as you look at solutions and you think forward. So that team, what they did was they built a prototype of a new type of toilet with styrofoam, just styrofoam pipes and duct tape. Not a working model, it doesn't have to be working, just to get the idea across and see if people respond, if there's some sort of a synergy, some sort of a resonance with the beta testers. And that brings us to step 6, beta testing. Now, doing beta testing requires a very difficult balance. On one hand, you've got to be very thick-skinned. On the other hand, you also have to be very sensitive. So it's hard to mesh both of those together. So most people in the world are very good at one or the other. To be good at product, you've got to be able to do both at the same time. And many people are unable to understand how this is possible, but it is possible. I can tell you from personal experience. Now, why do you need to be thick-skinned? Because you're up and personal with people. Your beta testers care about this pain point. They want you to succeed. So every now and then someone gets overly emotional and they give you strong feedback, maybe they say some offensive words. It's important for you to remember that they're not trying to offend you. Do not take it personally. They are really emotional about this topic, about this point, and that's a good thing. So view if it's any negative or negativity at this stage, that's fine, but view it as their passion. That's how they're feeling. So it's important to have thick skin, to not get dissuaded. Just try to figure out exactly where you can iterate. What you're looking for in beta testing is, how do I iterate to the next step? And I'll get to how do you know when you're finished. The second part is you've got to be sensitive, and this is because to really understand how to know what part of your prototype to iterate, it requires you to really pick up on the subtlety of human nuances, of their body language, of little sort of inflections in phrases or their voice or tonality, because most of the time your beta testers, they care and they want you to succeed, but humans, when they want someone else to succeed, they tend to be very polite and very supportive. And what that means is that they try not to give negative feedback. And that's all that you're looking for right now, is negative feedback, what's not working, right? Because what is working you can sort of pick up on. But it's what's not working that you need to get. And the best way to do that is to focus on this phrase. Pay attention to what they say, write it down. The words are important. But don't focus on what they say, focus on what they do, right? So if you hand them the prototype and they sort of look at it and say, oh wow, this is amazing, wow, this is really great work, fantastic, good job, wow, this is really, tell me more about this, that's really great, what happened just there? They only spent a few seconds touching it, doing something, put it straight down, didn't touch it. So if you listen to them, if you look at the first layer of what they're communicating, it seems to be that what you did was a great job. But in actuality, they didn't try it out. They put it straight down. It didn't engage them. So you need to be very sensitive and pick up on those subtle cues. Now, when you've succeeded in the iteration process when you build something that you give to someone and they're unable to put it down. They're always picking it back up and it's mesmerizing. And for our particular case, as an example, we knew we succeeded with our particular project, which was how do you get older people to exercise because it becomes really boring. So our particular solution was to create an interactive game which elderly people can play with their grandchildren. That's through the internet, so it's easily available, they don't need to visit. And our prototype was, luckily we had a computer science major so we could build this out. Very simple, basic, is a physical device that tracks where you're standing, and as you move, the game ping pong on the very old Atari game of ping pong, it would show up on the screen, and as you move left and right, the paddle would move left and right. So actually it would be like this: as I move left, the paddle will move left; if I move right, the paddle moves right. So we made this game and we thought, oh, it's really simple. It took maybe a couple of nights to put together, but it's important to get out there early, iterate quickly. So get the prototype out early and iterate quickly. We got to a point where on the demonstration day we found that we had a line of people who wanted to try it out because they'd never seen anything like that before. And the people who were using it, they really felt uncomfortable because they didn't want to give up their spot, but they were really conscious of the fact that there was a line forming. So we knew at that point that we had a very good idea, a very good product idea, because of how addictive it had become. So even in the simple form, it was addictive. People liked to use it, engage with it. And that's when you know that you're ready to move on to the next stage, which is identify your market. So if you're lucky and you get to this stage, then what you're looking for is, hopefully what you're looking for in most cases is impact, right? And the best way to affect impact is for the market to be very large. That means the more people are using it. Now, there might be circumstances, for example, for my case, we've all been there, where your particular pain point addresses, it's very, very meaningful for you, but the market is very small. And it's important for you to get used to the idea that you might not be able to solve all the problems that are out there. And it's okay to put something on the back burner and come back to it later, a year later or something else, maybe something changes, but sometimes the market just isn't big enough. And for my particular case, my mother was suffering from a specific disease that not many people in the world suffered from. And given my specific experience in bioex as a physicist who had himself done a biotech startup for early stage skin cancer detection, for skin cancer, I could pivot. I could go from a small orphan disease of basal cell carcinoma as a genetic sort of as a genetic defect. I could go from that to a very large market for skin cancer screening. We managed to pivot that, but when it came to my own mother, there was nowhere to pivot it because it was this disease, and it was the one person that I cared about more in the whole world who had this disease, and there was no way around it. At some stage, I just had to accept that there were no available solutions, and even if there were available solutions, it was a very small market, and it would just not be possible to fundraise. But that's a side note. By the time I got to that realization, there was very little that could be done, and so you focus on other things. But that's a part of it. That's a part of life. And as you go through the product design the process, it's important for you to recognize that your life is still happening left and right, and you need to stay focused and pick one idea. So, for example, what's an idea of a product for a market that didn't exist, and yet the market was created for it? That's the iPhone, smartphones. So it's always possible that you can create markets, but you should be aware of the fact that it isn't always possible. So to identify your market, there's material online that you can go through on how do you identify how large your market is. Typically, it would essentially be identifying how much your potential product would monetarily mean to people. Is it the price of a coffee? Is it the price of a computer every year? Is it a piece of clothing, high-end clothing, low-end clothing? So what would you price it at? Multiply that by how many do you expect to sell at the best of times once you've been in the market. So this is not a projection how you're going to get there. This is what is going to be at the best of times. Roughly, you multiply those two together. That's your market size. Be as optimistic as possible. This is your one chance. Once you do get in front of investors, to you can't go back and increase that number. So go ahead with the biggest number possible, because they will always assume that you've overestimated. That's just the game. And make sure to also have a pretty good understanding of how much it's going to cost. So what you're charging should be significantly more than what the cost is, and that's just good business. And good business usually results in good products, good follow-up products, which leads to a good society. So there's no shame in being good at business, but there's no shame in admitting that this is not something that inspires you. So you could end up at this time figuring out that you love the product process, you're a product person, but the business side of it really doesn't do anything for you. And at that stage, if you're lucky, someone in your team has picked up and gone with the business side, they love it, or you have friends in the business school or somewhere else who are more than happy to give you feedback because they love your product. Maybe they'll come on board. And if not either of these, then whether you like it or not, if this is something that's meaningful for you, you've got to dive in and be the business person as well until something perhaps changes. So, and that then brings us to step 9, which is fundraising. So you've come up with a prototype, people love using it, they're engaged, you've got it on videos, you've got demonstrations, you've done the marketing work, you figured out there's a massive market for this, or there's a strategy, it's an orphan disease, and the various reasons why maybe some investors would be interested in that, but you've made it to fundraising. And I will try to make another video on fundraising specifically, but the key point to remember for fundraising is this: they are in it to invest. Whether they invest in this or that or somewhere else, doesn't matter. They have made a quota that this is how much they're going to invest every year. And if it's going to go to someone, it might as well go to you. So when you're in front of an investor, always remember, you are making it easy for them to invest in something great, right? They are struggling. They're struggling to find something good to put their investment in. You're making it easy for them, right? So you are there as their angel in some senses. And of course, they're going to ask tough questions. They're going to be very aggressive because they want to make sure that they've done their due diligence. Now, a key psychological trick is to make them jealous, because there are lots of investors out there, but only one of you. And you have a great idea. And one of these investors is going to be the lucky person. So make them as jealous as possible that if it's not them, it's going to be someone else. Right? And once you've started that, little game of jealousy going on, that's when you realize you are becoming an entrepreneur. But that's a whole other conversation. But that's sort of the trick to fundraising. And always be confident. Always be overconfident is better than underconfident. And always raise money. Always raise money. So even if you've raised the money and you hand it over the next day, give it back to them, doesn't matter, they'll respect you because for whatever reason it didn't happen. But from my personal experience and what I've seen around Silicon Valley and the world in general, if you can go around and say, I received this much money, I returned it the next day, I didn't cash a check, doesn't matter, someone offered me this many millions of dollars, that's an achievement in itself. And if you, for whatever reason, do not get to that stage, right? If you decline the offer before the offer is made, for example, there's a lot that you'll have to explain. So get to the point, get the money, cancel the check, give it back if you really don't want to do it, because that is an answer in itself. There'll be very few questions after the fact that some investor was willing to put money down in you. And the rest of it, the rest of fundraising, overconfidence, all of that, the Theranos type questions, that's left for another video. But I think at this stage, hopefully you have a good enough idea of How do you start to identify pain points in your life and someone else's life? Shadow people, get as much information as possible. You brainstorm with your group. You have a consensus on what the top idea is. You prototype and you iterate like crazy with beta testers back and forth. Then you size the market. And after you size the market, you're not doing this just for fun. You want to make a living out of this. You go to investors, you fundraise. You just repeat the process again and again and again. Eventually you'll find out you are churning out a lot of very interesting products people didn't even know that they wanted. So best of luck with that. And if you enjoyed this video, you thought it was helpful, if you have any feedback, please leave the feedback below. And if you would like more of these, please let me know. And please do subscribe and ring the bell that appears next to it so that you get informed of the upcoming videos. So thank you so much for listening. I tried really hard to condense this as much as possible. It's not quite there, but this in itself is the iteration process. So if you give me feedback, I would appreciate it and try to work it into my videos. At this stage, I'm thinking more towards leaning towards quantity of videos over quality per video. So if I can churn out twice as many videos of lower quality where there's more content, then I'm getting more information out into places like Pakistan, where people can use it, as opposed to high quality videos. I'm getting maybe half as much content, but at this stage I'm still interested to see which way it goes. So thank you so much, and I will see you next time.